My name is Suryanarayana. I'm a senior full stack developer cum trainer in CDCK Development Center, IARE. Today, I'm going to discuss about one of the features of Servlets, that is session management and client state persistence. Session management and client state persistence. Before starting session management and client state persistence, in Servlets API, the Servlets are classified into two types. One is generic Servlet, and second one is HTTP Servlet. Generic Servlet and HTTP Servlet. HTTP Servlet, the name itself is clearly indicating that it will run only for, and it can be requested only with HTTP protocol. It can run only with HTTP protocol. It is completely HTTP protocol compliant. Then what about generic Servlet is, see, as we already discussed about, the web server architecture in the last before session, in the Servlets introduction, when we were deploying our first AIM36 first application into Tomcat web server, we discussed what are all the processes that exist inside the web server that we have discussed. So generally, the Java-based web servers, usually the Tomcat so-called HTTP web server is called a Java web server. The Tomcat web server, if you take for instance, it's a more than a web server, Java web server, it's a HTTP Java web server because it contains three processes inside it. One is the HTTP engine, and second one is Catalina, Servlet container, and third one is Jasper, JSP container. So Apache HTTP Tomcat web server is a HTTP web server that contains HTTP engine, Servlet container, and JSP container. These three together exist inside Tomcat web server, and Tomcat web server runs on port number 8080 by default. You can change the port number. More precisely, it is a HTTP based web server. It will accept HTTP protocol requests for HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Servlet, JSP, or for any web component inside these web applications. It will accept only HTTP protocol requests. Suppose if other than HTTP web server, if any FTP web server or SMTP web server or any other protocol web server other than HTTP, FTP or SMTP or FTP or any other protocol, those protocol servers are specific only to file transferring or mail receiving or mail sending, SMTP, POP3, FTP. They are dedicated so far only for their protocol specific applications. They are not extended to having a Servlet container and JSP containers inbuilt in that. They are dedicated only to their protocol specific applications. Suppose in this FTP, SMTP, and POP3 and various other web servers also, suppose if the Servlet container and JSP container along with FTP server, if Servlet container and JSP containers are placed inbuilt in these web servers also, then when you access FTP server, you have to access Servlet with FTP protocol. SMTP with SMTP protocol, some other protocol, POP3 protocol. So if you request their web server with their protocol specific, with their web server specific protocol, and in that if there is a Servlet container, there if you deploy your Servlet, the Servlet can run. Which Servlets can run the independent of these protocols, FTP or SMTP or POP3 or any other protocol that is generic Servlet. The generic Servlet is not specific to HTTP protocol. Any web protocol request if comes, it will be instantiated, init method will be executed for each client request. One thread will run the service method. At the end of the server shutdown or when deploying the web application, the Servlet instance will be destroyed. Before the time that is called Servlet instance is destroyed. So that is how the Servlet life cycle is. So Servlet container will take care of. JSP container also takes care of converting JSP document into Servlet and runs JSP as Servlet. That JSP container will take care. And only if the protocol specific web server receives their respective protocol request and could be able to forward it to JSP container, Servlet container, even Servlets and JSPs can run on these protocol servers also. But mostly the Servlets and JSP are mostly designed very much completed to HTTP protocol is using 39 request status and 39 responses of HTTP protocol. That's why they are more of HTTP specific. Otherwise, they can be independent of HTTP protocol also. and they can run other web servers also. So industry is still maintaining Servlet and JSP containers only in HTTP web servers, but not in other protocol servers. That's okay, fine. So that is how generic Servlet is protocol independent, and HTTP Servlet is HTTP protocol dependent. And HTTP protocol is having some cookie concept using which we can maintain session management. That cookie concept doesn't exist in FTP or SMTP or other protocols. I guess I have not been very much in depth into those protocols. That when you study those protocol specifications, you will come to know. So by taking the advantage of cookies in HTTP protocol, they enabled the session management and client-side persistence in servlets. For that, HTTP servlet is more suitable. Generic servlet is not compliant to session management and the client-side persistence because it won't consume cookies. So then anyway, we'll discuss further in the discussion. So here in this table, we are comparing simple, servlet, generic servlet and HTTP servlet. In the entire servlet hierarchy, object is a supermost class of all the Java classes. In that there is no doubt. There is an interface called servlet. There is an interface called servlet config. There is an interface called serializable, and there is a class called generic servlet. There is a class called HTTP servlet. This is the hierarchy. So generic servlet class is derived from object, implemented from serializable, implemented from servlet config, implemented from servlet interface, servlet config, and serializable. So from the servlet interface, init service destroy, get servlet info, get servlet config methods will come. In the servlet config, get init parameter names, get servlet context, get init parameter names, get init parameter, get init parameter names, get init parameters. With one single parameter, if you are having multiple values, get init parameters, get init parameters and parameter names will come. Get init parameter values means with single parameter, multiple values will exist, they will come. Like that, around some 5 methods exist in servlet config interface. Serializable interface is not having any method, but every request coming in from the network and every response going out of the servlet into network, they must be serializable. Because of that reason, generic servlet class is implemented from serializable interface also. HTTP servlet is derived from generic servlet. So this HTTP servlet is having same service method with servlet request and response objects as arguments. Service method with HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response objects as arguments. Do get, do post, do put, do delete, do head, do options, do trace. And maybe do patch. Something new method is introduced recently. So 7 to 8 HTTP protocol callback methods exist in HTTP servlet. So if you want your servlet to be more of HTTP specific, then you can go for HTTP servlet. Otherwise, if you do not want to be a HTTP protocol specific, only for one single HTML file request to servlet, and once the servlet responds to the HTML request, the client, and if there is no communication between client and server, then you can go for a generic servlet. But if there are multiple conversations from HTML to servlet, then next to this HTML request to servlet, then gives another response. Another HTML again communicates to the same servlet and another servlet, again that will give the response. Again, one more HTML will send the request to servlet. Like this, if servlet receives requests from multiple client requests across multiple conversations, if all these conversations want to be stored in the servlet, then it should be HTTP servlet. That is what session management and client-side persistence today we are calling it as. So that we'll discuss later. So servlet is an interface. Generic servlet is an abstract class. HTTP servlet is also an abstract class. So I'm sorry, HTTP servlet is not an abstract class. In that all the service methods and all the do methods are implemented. Generic servlet is abstract class. We should check in the API. That's not a problem. So servlet interface exists in Java servlet. Servlet config, servlet context, servlet request, servlet response, servlet exception. Those are all exist in servlet interface. And HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response, HTTP session, cookie. Those are all exist in Java servlet and HTTP package. This top level interface. This is servlet interface subclass. This generic servlet implemented class is HTTP servlet. All the methods are abstract here. Only service method is abstract here. No abstract methods exist here, right? I guess HTTP servlet, I don't know whether he declared abstract or not, but there are no abstract methods in HTTP. Use it when you want to develop your own servlet container, that's okay. Implement service method. Session management doesn't exist, session management exists here. Session management exists, we can maintain state persistence also. So what is session management and client state persistence? This is the main reason why we go for HTTP based servlets. Here is a small example I am demonstrating. I am having one form called index.html or first.html. And this is a kind of application that we are accepting the client registration process across 3 HTML forms. In one form, we'll ask the personal details. In another form, we'll ask the duration qualification details. In another form, we'll ask for professional details. In another form, we'll ask for, some miscellaneous details like, hobbies, interests, marital status, the PAN card, PAN card, or otherwise, etc., etc. Like, are you having, visa, a passport for any upgrade opportunity, like that. Various things we can ask, like personal information, qualification information, your professional experience, and if any miscellaneous information if you want to ask across multiple screens, or if you ask in one single screen, the HTML form will be a bigger one. So we want to ask 5 fields in one form, 5 fields in another form, 5 fields in another form, like that across in 3 to 4 forms. You collect some 15 to 20 fields and store the registration details of the user in database. So that is how if you plan, then certainly we should go for HTTP Servlet. Why? Because in this application, we are submitting first name and last name and clicking on next button. What happens? The request comes to MFRS. MFRS means multi-form registration servlet, extension of HTTP Servlet. Multi-form registration servlet means it will accept and process multiple form requests. So here in the service method, what we are doing, here you observe in the what you call in the HTML form, the simple label, this input type is called text, this label, this input type is called text. Here we are placing one hidden field called input type is called hidden, name is equal to form number, value is equal to 1. And in every of these HTML form, these first name, last name, email, password, mobile address are visible fields. But in every HTML form, we are maintaining one hidden field. That is form number. Form number, value is equal to 1, value is equal to 2, value is equal to 3. And every form will submit their form number as a hidden field. That is not visible in the HTML form, but that will be included in the HTTP Servlet request. In the request body, along with the form data in an encoded form string, that hidden field also will go. Even submit is equal to next also, submit is equal to next, submit is equal to finish also will go. One text field value, one hidden field value, or submit button value. 4 values will go in a encoded format in HTTP request body. Because usually we will submit this form using HTTP post method. Okay. So the form is submitted to Servlet. In Servlet, what we are doing, we are checking request.get parameter form number we are taking. So form number will come 1, but it will come as a string. All inputs will come as a string. So to convert string into int, is that percent. We took into int form number. If form number is 1, retrieve first name and last name from the HTTP request, where they should be stored, and again you send second HTML form to the browser. When second HTML form is submitted, if you don't store in these details, first name and last name anywhere, if you don't store, email and password will come. This time the form number is 2. Here password and email and password are retrieved. Second if condition is also completed. These details are not stored anywhere. That is the third form is generated here. Third form is submitted. Mobile number and address are retrieved. Mobile number and address are retrieved. Mobile number and address are retrieved, but in order to process this complete form request processing, to store these user registration details into database, first name, last name is required, email, password is required, then mobile address is also required. But during the third form submission, only email and password are available, first name, last name, email, password are gone. Because they are retrieved in the previous conversation, they are stored in local variables, but these local variables are not present anywhere. So as soon as that if condition is closed, or once HTTP Servlet response is completed during the first request and second form request response, those variables are gone. Those variable values are gone. The values are not present anywhere, stored anywhere. So what happens? So this is not a client state persistence, right? If you want to maintain a client state persistence, what you have to do is, here I'll explain you how that HTTP session management and client state persistence can take place in the next diagram. Okay. So if you see this, here client is submitting it. Here I am not repeating the form again. First name, last name, and one hidden field and one submit button. Yeah, okay. Once again, I am not displaying the entire form here like this. Here I am displaying only how the HTTP request header and body is. How the HTTP request and header and body is. This is HTTP request header, this is HTTP request, and this is HTTP response. This is response, this is request. Every request and response is having a header and body with a blank line as separated. Even in the HTTP response also, the header and body is separated with a black space. This is how original HTTP protocol is. So in the HTTP request, because first name, last name, hidden field, and submit button are submitted. First name is equal to ABC ampersand, last name is equal to Kumar ampersand, form number is equal to 1 ampersand, submit is equal to next. This is how the entire HTML form data is converted into an HTTP encoded format. This is called as HTTP encoded format. And this HTTP encoded format is sent through a HTTP request body. That's why we call it as payload. If you submit HTML form using get method, then the data will be appended at the end of the URL. Then that kind of sending format is called a query string. So this is payload. So payload. That request comes to Servlet container, because the request is coming for the Servlet container /mfrs. Like that, the request is coming. HTTP /localhost/localhost/16535/ that session management application name /mfrs. That is a Servlet URL byte. The request comes to Servlet container. So what Servlet container will do? Servlet container will generally, when request is coming to Servlet container will check for which Servlet the request is coming for, MFRS. So MFRS Servlet instance is created, its init method is invoked, and that object is passed into one thread. That thread will execute. Once the thread execution is completed and the service method execution is completed, thread object is restored. Servlet object will remain. Response is entered client. That is what the general Servlet container Java is. But in this case, especially if you observe, we are requesting for a HTTP Servlet. We are not requesting for a generic Servlet. We are requesting for a HTTP Servlet. If you are requesting for a HTTP Servlet, Servlet container is having some additional job. The job is Servlet container will check. Okay, on one hand, Servlet lifecycle it will handle. That I am not discussing again here because there is already explained before. So, what Servlet container will check is Servlet container will check the request is coming for HTTP Servlet. If the request is coming for HTTP Servlet, Servlet container will check, is this HTTP request header? This is HTTP request header. Is this HTTP request header is having any request attribute? HTTP protocol is having a 39 headers in the request. In the request, it's having 39 request headers, and the response also is having 39 response headers. If you see RC2616 and RC2109, I guess 2109, RC209, RC2616. One is cookie specification, one is HTTP protocol 1.1 specification. That specification, if you read it, you will come across all the request headers and response headers of HTTP protocol. In the HTTP request header, there should be one request header that should carry the session ID to Servlet container. Then only Servlet container will recognize that the client is an old request. Old request then in the sense that the client has already requested before. If Servlet container, and how that request should come, via one HTTP request header called cookie. The cookie is a memory that exists in the browser. Server will store its information into browser in a form of cookies. And the idea behind the server storing the information into client browser cookie is that the browser job is to include all those cookies in every request. While sending every request from the browser, it is the browser job to include all the cookies in the request header and send it back to the server. And the server says, send some information to you. In your server conversations, you send all the cookies back into server. In that, some personalization details, some login security details, or session ID details, or some preferences details, something else exists in that. Based on that, I'll respond to the client. What kind of products is he requesting for? What kind of, layout is he expecting? And what kind of light theme or dark theme is he expecting? Which language client is interested in, English or France or Spanish? Lot of details. Server says, I'll send something to you. It says to the browser, I'll send something to you in a form of cookie. You retransmit that cookie information back to me. Based on that, I'll understand what kind of information the client wants. Based on that, I'll generate my further responses. That's what server says. So in this case, Servlet container will send the session ID via cookie to the browser. That is why in the first request, it expects that is this HTTP request is having any cookie with J session ID is equal to some cookie session ID is 32 character length ID. Cookie colon J session ID is equal to 32 character length session ID should come. Servlet container will check is this request is having any cookie. There is no cookie. If there is no cookie, then Servlet container will understand that okay, this request is a first request. Then what it does, because the client is a first client, then immediately in Java Servlet.http package, there is one interface called HTTP session. This is HTTP session. Immediately one HTTP session object is created. One HTTP session object is created, and in that HTTP session object, session ID exists, creation time, last access time, is new, maximum timeout, and various other properties exist. Session ID, is new, creation time, last access time, maximum timeout, like that, and session timeout period. Some 4 or 5 properties exist in the HTTP session object, or 4 or 5 variables. Along with that, the HTTP session object also internally contains one object like hash table or hash map. So what it stores is hash table or hash map is key value based, isn't it? Nothing but when form is submitting, the form field name and value, these two should be stored as a key and value pairs in the HTTP session object. So internally it should contain one hash table or hash map. So this whole information is a HTTP session object, and one hash table with these 5 attributes is a HTTP session object. Like this one HTTP session object, the Servlet container creates. Along with the request object, this form data, this HTTP session object is also sent to Servlet service method as a HTTP Servlet request object. And what this HTTP Servlet request object contains? It contains not only request parameters, form data, it will internally contain this HTTP session object also. This is just like passing pass by reference. Okay. That is why in Servlet, how we retrieve the session object is through a HTTP Servlet request object that gets session. Because the request object is having a session object. So from that session object, anyway, session object is coming instead of passing one more argument. The HTTP session object is stored in HTTP request and passed into service method. That's it. So that's how the request comes to service method. Here we are checking form number, first name and last name we are retrieving. And what we are doing is in the HTTP session object, what are the methods in hash table and hash map? Put, get, remove. In HTTP session, the method names are given as set attribute, get attribute, remove attribute. Same as hash table that put, get, remove. Okay. Set attribute, get attribute, remove attribute. Using get attribute, we are storing first name and last name. Storing. Then we are sending second form. So, though first form process completed and if condition is closed, the data which is taken into first name and last name variables are stored into HTTP session object, first name and last name. They are there here, A, B, C, and they are stored outside of Servlet service method. They are not in local variables inside the service method. They are already stored, preserved in the Servlet container into one HTTP session object. During first response, the 200 OK. 200 OK means that there is a HTTP status code telling browser that the HTTP request processing is successfully completed. So then what happens is 200 OK. Along with that, using set-cookie request header. This is a response header. It's checking. It's a request header. This is a response header. Using set-cookie colon J session ID is equal to 32 character length session ID is stored in HTTP request header. Along with the entire second HTML form, whatever the email password, that form, the data is stored in HTTP request body. In HTTP request header, HTTP status code, status message, set-cookie J session ID is equal to 30 character length. This entire response comes to browser. So this second form will be rendered here. Again, second form is submitted to server. Then this time, in the HTTP request, the cookie J session ID is equal to 30 character ID exists. Then Servlet container will recognize that this HTTP session object is the client's HTTP session object. Again, this HTTP session object is passed into service method. Again, we are getting the session. In the first conversation, this HTTP session object internal hash table is having blank. But this time, the HTTP session object internal hash table is having already first name and last name values. So if the form number is 2, email and password, this is password, this password. Email and password, these two are again stored into email and password, but also stored here. Again, third form is submitted to server. Again, third form comes. Again, same HTTP session object is passed into request. Again, here we are getting the session object. From the session object, we retrieve. In the previous slide I have explained. So here, we are retrieving mobile number and password from request. From the HTTP session object, HTTP session object dot, HTTP session object dot, using HTTP session object dot, get attribute of first name, last name, email, password. These details will return. First name, last name, email, password. These details we are retrieving from HTTP session object during third form submission, and only mobile and address are retrieved from the request object. Mobile and address. These two are retrieved from request.get parameter. From the HTTP session object.get attribute, first name, last name, email, password are retrieved. Altogether 6 fields will come. When registration ID is generated, Servlet will store these details into registration table. Sends a final response to the client. During first and second conversations up to the third conversation where the first and second form data is stored is because of an HTTP session object. So storing client's data, the client's conversation data, client's form data, first form data and second form data into HTTP session object, storing the data is called as client-side persistence. But recognizing the client with the session ID, if not generated, send one session ID and recognize the client with the session ID back in the further conversations by Servlet container is called as session management. So in this entire process, session management is managed by Servlet container and client-side persistence is managed by web developer, Servlet developer. So that is what the entire regarding session management client-side persistence is. For this application, I created one index.html file in session management project. In the web-banner web.xml file, Servlet is configured, this MFR Servlet. In the classes directory, we'll paste on multi-form registration Servlet.class. Here is the HTML form. The HTML form contains form method is called post, action is called ./MFR, multi-form registration Servlet. How many fields? First name and last name. One hidden field, form name is equal to 1. Submit button is equal to next. When this HTML form is executed, it looks like this. Okay. First name, last name, middle field, and next. Next, this is MFR Servlet. Here in service method, we are setting MIME type, getting the response object. Here we are getting the form number from the request.get parameter, hidden field, converting into int. When we are getting the session object also, form number is 1. With the attribute names, first name and last name, F name and L name, we are storing first name and last name request parameter into HTTP session object. Then, what is the next step? The next step is this complete Servlet implementation. Remember, this is second form generation. First name and last name are submitted. Second form contains email and password. So form name is called post, action is called ./MFRs. Here is one very important topic. The topic is who is managing the session? Servlet container. How Servlet container is managing the session? By sending the cookie to the browser using set-cookie during response and recognizing the session ID through cookie in the request header. Cookie call J session ID is called set-to-character link session. And with the help of cookies stored in the browser and retaken back from the browser, Servlet container is recognizing whether the client is an old client or new client. And that's how it is recognizing the clients. Suppose if in the browser we can disable cookies, we can disable JavaScript, we can disable CSS, except HTML. In the browser, there are tools available. We can disable all except HTML. Suppose if if client disables the cookie, then how session is managed? So, as an alternative to that, as a developer, we precautionarily, while sending every form or response back to the browser, at the end of the action path, we put semicolon J session ID is equal to the 32 character length session ID. Okay, we are not going to have hardcode ABC 1 to 3 XYZ. We write HTTP session object dot get ID here. I'm sorry, I should not write like this. I should write like this. The session ID, email and password, form number 2, value 2. This will go email and password. Again, that form comes. By the time when that form request comes, second form, the HTTP session object is already having a first name and last name fields. Again, email and password are retrieved and again they are stored into HTTP session object. First name, last name, email, password are stored here. Again, third form is generated. In third form also, at the end of the action part, we are referring semicolon J session ID is equal to. This is managing session ID through a URL rewriting. This is previously that is managing session ID through a cookies. This is managing session ID through a URL rewriting. In the URL, you are every time rewriting the session ID. Even though if browser disables the cookie, this form will go as just to the browser, runs on the browser. In the XML form, this action part exists ./mfrs. At the end, J session ID is equal to the session ID. So server will recognize it. And though cookies are disabled on the browser, session management is guaranteed. Again, mobile number and address will come during second form request processing. Third form will go. When third form request comes, we are retrieving first name, last name, email, password from HTTP session object. And from the request.get parameter, we are retrieving mobile number and address. And finally, using JDBC code, we are generating registration ID, getting the last value and incrementing by 1 here. With the registration ID, first name, last name, email, password, mobile address, we are storing record into which table, registration 1 table. And finally, we are sending a response to the client saying that a record is inserted, registration ID is so on. So catch block closed because this entire JDBC code is enclosed in try catch block, else block. This is the else block, service method class. So this is end of simple, and here I would better replace this with HTTP session object dot get ID here and here as well. But for understanding sake, I hard coded and shown. Otherwise, originally we should write like this. If cookies are disabled in the browser, session ID cannot be retransmitted to the server in future conversations. For that, alternately, we are sending JSession ID to server via URL rewriting. Same thing I placed here and here also. The slide. So this is regarding. This is the purpose of HTTP Servlet. In such cases, we should go for HTTP Servlet. But if the client request is a single requested response and a client to HTML to Servlet, Servlet back to response back to client, there are no further conversations exist. Then we can go for generic Servlet. If multiple conversations exist like this, then we should go for HTTP Servlet. That's all about session management and client-side persistence of today's topic. We'll meet you with another topic next time. Until then, thank you. Goodbye.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.